Hello, welcome to the Thematic Intelligence podcast. At Global Data Thematic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Thomas Pothalingam, and today I'm joined by senior analyst Chris Papadopollous to discuss sustainability reporting standards. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing great, Thomas. How you doing?
All right, thank you. Not too bad. You recently helped publish a set of reports on net zero strategies in multiple sectors, which is a major topic within the ESG theme. We're currently working on a net zero in technology report together, with a particular focus on some of the largest technology companies' data quality and transparency. From my own research and experience looking through CSR reports more generally, it can be difficult to find and understand some data points that some companies would prefer to keep hidden or less public. I'd like to start by asking you if you could introduce us to the topic of sustainability reporting and what it entails for companies. So, what are these reporting standards and what kind of things do they cover?
Sustainability reporting's been around for a really long time, and it started with voluntary standards. So one of the oldest you will see is something called the GRI. There's a very large number of acronyms in sustainability reporting, but GRI is one of the oldest ones. It stands for the Global Reporting Initiative. Companies who sign up to that, it's completely voluntary, and you've seen very large, listed companies report that data for a long period of time. But it covers various things like emissions and also sort of social factors like board diversity and governance factors and things like that, health and safety issues if you're an industrials company, things like that. Another one, SASB as well, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. That was another voluntary one that a lot of companies adopted, which was sector specific. And then one of the more recent voluntary ones, which started to become made into law, was a TCFD, which was, if I can remember exactly what it stands for, it's the Task Force for
Climate related financial disclosures.
that's it. Thanks. That's the one. So that was spearheaded by Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, and it was largely around communicating to your investors how you identified climate risk and how you went about addressing those risks and what sort of strategies you were using and what targets you were setting for yourself. And then that was very much a case of, if you were an investor, can I see whether a company is really thinking about this with these issues, and are they prepared for them? Have they looked at the real risks here? And so is my investment at risk at all? So it's from a purely financial perspective, those regulations.
Thanks for that explanation. That was really informative. I'd like to find out more about these sustainability reporting frameworks. I know that companies are facing greenwashing accusations and are rightly being criticized for lacking transparency in ESG agendas or having low quality carbon emissions reporting, as well as lacking alignment with net zero goals. But there's also important scrutiny being leveled at these organizations and initiatives that are trying to facilitate, improve, and enhance companies' climate strategies. I think crucially to this debate, not all companies that set these reporting standards and ESG frameworks agree on the right approach, and a few, in fact, actively disagree with one another. So, what kind of challenges do these reporting standards face?
Well, the main point to make is that some of them are being put into law. So in the UK took the TCFD route. So the TCFD standards are now mandatory for a lot of companies in the UK. There was an attempt to make a unified set of standards by the another acronym, the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, which was a bit like TCFD but more advanced. And a lot of countries have committed to adopting that, and the UK will probably adopt that. The EU's gone down a slightly different route with the more detailed reporting standards. The US has published some standards recently on a federal level, and those are slightly less detailed. So the big challenges companies are mainly around ensuring that the data quality and the reporting quality is as good as their financial, their usual financial reporting quality. Because for many years, if you look at the voluntary reporting standards, and if you look at them carefully as we've done, you'll see they're full of mistakes. They're full of mistakes because it was not audited, it was not put through the same rigorous processes and standards that audited financial statements were. And now the new rules that companies are adopting, often it's the case with these rules that they're integrating the sustainability reporting standards with normal reporting standards. So it's like they're part of the financial reporting process. So they have to go through the audit process. So the finance team and the audit teams at your auditor, they're all having to learn about sustainability reporting standards now. So the main challenge for companies is, we were doing these sustainability reports. We had a sustainability team. They worked mostly with our marketing team. Now it's got to be like way more robust than it was. So now the finance team is involved and the CFO is involved. All the data has to go through these other processes and be managed in a different way. So it requires a sort of internal digital transformation to go along with it. That's the main challenge. And then you're trying to automate it, trying to speed it up.
You've got to be holistic in your approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I saw that last week the International Emissions Trading Association, or IETA, another acronym, launched its guidelines for high integrity use of carbon credits in an attempt to set out how companies can effectively accelerate climate action. On the other side, however, this week also the Science Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI, had to publish a clarification following significant internal and public backlash over its plans to update its standard for corporate net zero target setting to include the use of environmental attribute certificates, or EACs, such as emissions reduction credits to help address Scope 3 emissions. For some, companies' climate pledges are coming under increasing scrutiny for relying too heavily on offsetting schemes rather than on actual emissions reductions. I guess within this context of enhanced scrutiny surrounding companies' ESG credentials, are these sustainability reporting standards improving?
Well, for target setting specifically in the use of offsets, what companies typically would do, they would start, if they were on their sort of ESG journey, they produce their sustainability report with their data in it. Then they create some targets. Then they go to the SBTI, a Science Based Targets Initiative, and get those targets verified, which take a year or two. And the SBTI just says, oh yeah, this target's ambitious enough. It doesn't judge how you're going to achieve it. What it did used to say was, if you had a long-term target, a net zero target, you're aiming for net zero by 2050, something like that, they would say you can achieve 90% of that, from the current time by reducing emissions, and the other 10% would have to be very high quality carbon removals. And I think that's still the case for Scope 1 and 2. What they wanted to say was the change they want to make, the proposed making, can companies use carbon offsets to hit their Scope 3 targets? Now, of course, when you report the data, you still have to report the data without the use of offset, but then you can add the offsets onto that afterwards and say, look, we're sort of net zero because we use these offsets. The real challenge is just around offset quality, because so many assumptions are used to calculate the impact of an offset. How many CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions were avoided by one specific offset or one specific offsetting project? It relies on assumptions, and so it's never exact. There's always some element of judgment or opinion. And that's why people don't like these things. They've tended to be overstated in the past. They've been trying to get the market to work for about 20, 30 years now, and it hasn't quite come together. So it's a bit of a surprise announcement by the SBTI that it wanted to suddenly allow offsets to be used to meet these targets. They've developed, there was another acronym, the ICVMI, I think it was, developed a new sort of set of standards or principles for judging carbon offsets and their quality. But I just don't think a lot of the skeptics in the market aren't convinced. And I suppose a lot of the people who want the carbon offset market to work, there's a lot of sort of startups and a lot of big money in the offsets market who want it to work. I think they'll be quite happy about it. But I don't think any of the new standards or anything like that on offsets has solved any of the issues with offsets. I think they're still going to have the same issues there.
And that relates to kind of a follow-up question, which was, are there any sectors that are particularly transparent about their reporting, that have great data quality, are quite advanced in their approach to sustainability? Can you, I don't know, any to point out?
I think the main thing, because there's lots of companies that will produce very accurate data and well-presented data, and you can download it all straight into a spreadsheet, and it's very easy to work with. But I think what investors want and what other stakeholders want as well is they just want a really clear idea of the company's plan going forward. Really specifying the knowns and the unknowns. Like, we've made this target, we've got these emissions targets, we're going to invest this much in this technology and hope to achieve this by this time. Or if we don't know how we're going to get there, let's be transparent about that and where the gaps are and where we need to look. To some extent, even though the reporting standards increase the data quality, it's still up to the companies themselves to really improve the communications around that. You can see companies that fulfill all the standards, but still their communication around these issues isn't particularly good or easy to understand. I mean, in the sort of tech sector, the big hyperscalers, Google, Apple, Microsoft, they're all pretty good, but their emissions problems weren't particularly complicated anyway. It's like, okay, we use a lot of electricity, let's use lots of renewables. It's not too difficult an equation, but it's when you start getting going into things like people who make cement or concrete or chemicals. You get emissions there, both from things like power usage, from heat, from the chemical processes themselves. And so you've got quite complex sources of emissions with and there's some technologies there they can use, but they might be expensive, and we're not sure about the scalability and the timelines involved. So for them, it's a bit more difficult. But so if you look at sectors where the sources of emissions are a bit simpler, and they've been looking at this for a long time. If you look at things like big tech, but also things like airlines, for example, and automotive manufacturers, they're all quite good at doing this, and as well because all their businesses are similar, so they can copy off each other. As soon as one company does a good sustainability report, all the other companies can look at it and see what they're doing. But it's a bit harder to do in other sectors where the companies are a bit more diverse.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I guess despite the fierce debate on the validity and appropriateness of carbon credits and how they relate to companies' ESG agendas, the most important aspect of sustainability reporting is meaningful change to actions and behaviours. Given Scotland's net zero minister's comments, I think this week, that net zero by 2030 is out of reach already, it's important to focus on why sustainability standards are set in the first place. So since sustainability frameworks and reporting standards increasingly converge with national and international regulation, are we seeing a tangible change in behaviour in companies and how they report and act?
I think so. I mean, you definitely see companies looking to try and use more renewables and things like that. And it's because of the thing, Scotland, what did it do? It delayed its emissions target it had a 2030 emissions target, and it's delayed it. And that's not surprising, across the UK, there's not a lot of investment going on. It requires long-term investment. And what we typically do in the UK is we announce a big ambitious target, and then no investment goes in behind it. And then as we get closer to it, we realize, oh, this is coming up now, and we haven't really done a whole lot to achieve this. A lot of the onus then gets put on corporates when the government can't achieve its goals. More of the onus falls to corporates, and that's why a lot of the corporate emissions problems could be solved if governments just invested really heavily in renewables, for example.
Putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, but because they don't do that, then more of the onus gets shifted onto corporates. And sustainability reporting standards is one way of doing that. Now, I know the sustainability standards don't tell you to reduce emissions, but once you start reporting them, what gets measured gets managed.
Exactly. It's like bringing up accountability and making it more obvious.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you'll see loads, companies plugging in renewables or investing in some new technologies or investing in making their operations more efficient and things like that. I suppose it's been a case of, trying to get the low-hanging fruit, and then over the longer term where it gets more expensive, probably need to look more, probably will expect more on that in terms of things like, for some sectors, if you're in steel, for example, you've got to replace a whole blast furnace, a fossil fuel powered blast furnace, that's a big deal. So you can't do that straight away. Doing easy stuff like swapping out all your vehicle fleets for electric vehicles, a lot of companies have done that or are in the process of doing that. Stick a whole load of solar panels on the roof. A lot of corporates do that.
Energy efficient light bulbs, etc.
Yeah, all that stuff. So we've seen a lot of that. We've seen a lot of the low-hanging fruit get taken. So I suppose after sort of 2030, it's going to be more, a lot of that will have been done, and it's going to be more about some of those more difficult sources of emission.
Thank you very much, Chris, for these insights. You can find our Net Zero Strategies reports on the Intelligence Centre and in the report store. Thank you for listening, and from us in Thematic Intelligence, see you next time.